The Senate Armed Services Committee meets today to consider the nomination of General David Goldfein to be the 21st Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. General Goldfein, we thank you for joining us this morning. We're grateful for your many years of distinguished service to our nation, for your continued willingness to serve. I also recognize that you are a member of the elite group of pilots whose number of landings do not equal the number of takeoffs. Congratulations on that. It's not a club that many choose to be members of. You also welcome members of your family who are joining us this morning and thank them for supporting you and the nation. As is our tradition, at the beginning of your testimony, we will invite you to introduce any family members that are joining us today. Now more than ever, a strong Air Force is central to our nation's ability to deter adversaries, assure allies, and defend our national interests. Global challenges continue to grow. The threat of terrorism from North Africa to the Middle East to South Asia, advanced potential adversaries like Russia and China, and rogue states such as North Korea and Iran. Despite these growing threats, today's Air Force is the oldest, smallest, and least ready in its history. No doubt in part because of the arbitrary budget cuts that Congress and the President agreed to 5 years ago and have since failed to reverse. Even under the best of budget conditions, modern air, space, and cyber capabilities are much more expensive in absolute terms than their predecessors. That is, if they even have predecessors. That's one of the primary reasons the Air Force's inventory of warfighting weapons has steadily decreased over the past decades. In 1960, the United States Air Force had 2,000 bombers and 4,300 fighters. In 1980, that declined to 323 bombers and 3,600 fighters. Today, the Air Force has 159 long-range bombers and less than 2,000 fighter aircraft. Today, the Air Force is retiring aircraft faster than it procures them and will continue to do so for years to come. While the aircraft we have today are highly capable, our adversaries are shrinking that gap or finding asymmetric ways to negate our advantage. The Air Force's global reach and global power are being tested as our adversaries invest heavily in fifth-generation fighter aircraft, advanced missiles, and integrated air defense systems that expand contested airspace and exacerbate the tyranny of distance. Meanwhile, as our Air Force shrinks, the combination of relentless operational tempo and misguided reductions in defense spending continues to deplete readiness. The Air Force does not expect a return to full-spectrum readiness for more than a decade. General Goldfein, addressing these three challenges, capacity, capability, and readiness, will require the next Chief of Staff's strong leadership and personal engagement. One of the principal obstacles you will confront is a huge bow wave of modernization investment programs costs that are all coming due in the next decade. Just consider the list of Air Force modernization priorities: F-35A fighters, KC-46A tankers, B-21 bombers, J-STARS, Compass Call, AWACS, and a new trainer aircraft, not to mention a modernized nuclear force, including the ground-based strategic deterrent, B-61 gravity bomb, and the long-range standoff weapon. There's simply no way all of these important yet expensive modernization programs will fit into the projected Air Force budget. At this point, it is by no means clear to me that the Air Force has conceived a plausible path through this tremendous budget crunch. With the future of our Air Force on the line, it will be your task, if confirmed, to chart this course in the coming years. In any event, no matter how many dollars we spend, we won't be able to provide our military the equipment they need in a defense acquisition system that takes too long, costs too much, and innovates too little. In the last two defense authorization bills, this committee has embarked on a major effort to reform this system, including ways to empower our service chiefs to manage their own programs and take on greater accountability. I will be keenly interested in hearing how you would employ these new authorities to to accelerate and streamline Air Force acquisition programs, ensure our warfighters get the equipment they need when they need it, and act as a responsible steward of American taxpayer dollars. Finally, we must acknowledge the service and sacrifice of the outstanding men and women in the United States Air Force. As you mentioned in your opening statement, General Goldfein, the Air Force has been at war for 25 years straight, and we cannot take our airmen for granted. We must recognize that high operational tempo, reduced readiness, and lucrative opportunities outside the Air Force continue to drive some of our best talent to leave the service. I'm interested in your plans to recruit and retain the best talent for our Air Force, including how best to provide a competitive and tailored compensation package that incentivizes retention, especially for United States Air Force pilots. General Goldfein, we look forward to your testimony. Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me join you in welcoming General Goldfein to this confirmation hearing regarding his nomination to be the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. And General Goldfein, welcome to the Armed Services Committee, and thank you for your many years of service to our nation and your willingness to continue to serve. We are mindful that families also serve, and so we want to extend our thanks to the family as well, and you'll have an opportunity to please introduce your family. General Goldfein is highly qualified for the position to which he has been nominated. His most recent position is Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, which means he is extraordinarily familiar with the challenges facing the Air Force today and into the future. General Goldfein has also had numerous senior positions of responsibility before that, including Director of the Joint Staff. With all this responsibility and all these insights, I think General Goldfein is superbly prepared to serve as Chief of Staff of the Air Force. You will be tasked with significant responsibilities, recruiting and retaining a quality force, ensuring the force contains the necessary structure and readiness levels to meet our nation's current challenges and future challenges, and then the posture to respond to crises that are evolving today and could evolve in the future. That is all within your responsibility. The Air Force is facing challenges in affording all the aircraft and weapon systems that it needs. It's also facing recapitalization of its bomber fleet, the land-based missile fleet. And on top of those challenges, the Air Force and the rest of the military service are facing the sequestration cliff next year, which I think would be devastating. General Goldfein, I look forward to your thoughts on how you intend to take on these daunting challenges should you be confirmed. I intend to support your confirmation, and I hope there will be early action by the Senate to confirm you. Thank you again for your service to our nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General, as is the custom of this committee, we have standard questions to ask the nominees, and if you just respond appropriately to these questions. In order to exercise its legislative and oversight responsibilities, it's important that this committee and other appropriate committees of the Congress are able to receive testimony, briefings, and other communications of information. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
I have, sir.
Do you agree when asked to give your personal views, even if those views differ from the administration in power?
I do, sir.
Have you assumed any duties or undertaken any actions which would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
I have not, sir.
Will you ensure your staff complies with deadlines established for frequent communications, including questions for the record in hearings?
Yes, sir, I will.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes, sir, I will.
Will those witnesses be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes, sir, they will.
Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify upon request before this committee?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you agree to provide documents, including copies of electronic forms of communication, in a timely manner when requested by a duly constituted committee, or to consult with a committee regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such documents?
Yes, sir, I will.
Thank you. General, please proceed.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of this committee, let me begin by thanking you for your tireless support and advocacy for the greatest treasure in our nation's arsenal, the young men and women who continue to join our ranks and serve their country during time of war. If confirmed, it will be my honor to lead the over 660,000 active Guard.
General, I don't mean to interrupt, but would you care to introduce your family to the committee before
Yes, sir.
you move in?
Yes, sir, I would. I'm thrilled to introduce my family, beginning with our youngest daughter, Diana, who is a third-generation first-grade school teacher, following in the footsteps of her grandma, Mary, and her mother, who are both here today.
Welcome.
In a few months, Dinah will be a published author of her first children's book. She reminds me of the very best teachers I ever had growing up. Kind, caring, compassionate, but tough when she has to be.
Maybe we ought to make that required reading for her.
If asked, most of us can remember our favorite teachers, but almost all of us can name our first grade's teacher. Her kids are blessed to be in her class, and I could not be prouder to be her dad. Our oldest daughter, Danielle, is a captain in the Air Force and is on duty today, so could not attend. She's also third generation, following in the footsteps of her grandpa, Bill, a retired F-4 pilot who fought in Vietnam and is here today, and both of her uncles, her cousin, and her dad. Danny is a great officer and a combat veteran, having recently returned from a deployment to Afghanistan. She helps keep me grounded and in tune with our younger force, and I could not be a prouder father. All that's good in our daughters comes from their mother, Dawn, who I met in high school 40 years ago when both of our parents were stationed in Germany. Dawn represents the best deal our nation gets in the military family, our spouses. 33 years, 21 moves, 3 wars, and several deployments, to include a recent 2-year separation. I not only love her, I admire her strength and her courage, and I believe I am the luckiest man on the planet that she chose me.
Welcome to the entire family.
Chairman, I'd like to thank President Obama, Secretary Carter, Secretary James, and Chairman Dunford for this opportunity of a lifetime. I'd also like to thank General Mark and Betty Welsh. Not only are they concluding 40 years of distinguished service, they've led our Air Force over the past 4 years with passion, style, and unwavering commitment. It is my honor to serve as General Welsh's Vice Chief of Staff, and if confirmed, Dawn and I look forward to building on their success. Chairman, I've seen firsthand how important a service chief's relationship is with members of this committee to help you execute your oversight responsibilities. If confirmed, I am committed to building a relationship of trust and confidence with each of you based on openness, candor, and competence. The questions you just asked form the foundation of this relationship, and I fully understand the gravity and the importance of living up to my answers. Today's global landscape offers equal amount challenge and opportunity. A combination of strong states challenging world order, weak states that cannot preserve order, and undergoverned spaces providing sanctuary to extremists all represent challenges we must counter simultaneously as part of a joint coalition and interagency team. From troubling Chinese military activity in the South China Sea, to recent provocative actions by Russia in Crimea and Ukraine, to continued malign activity across the Middle East by Iran, to the increasingly unpredictable actions we see out of North Korea. Each represents state-sponsored activity that challenges world order and the stability and predictability all civilized nations rely on for prosperity and freedom. Add to this the military campaign to deliver a lasting defeat to ISIL and our continued work in Afghanistan, and we have the framework Secretary Carter laid out months ago as the 5 global challenges the Department of Defense must be ready to counter: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremism. If confirmed, I take very seriously my role as a member of the Joint Chiefs and look forward to providing an airman's voice as we deliberate military options, capabilities, and risk in formulating our best military advice. The other hat I will wear if confirmed is the top officer in my service, responsible for assisting Secretary James to properly organize, train, and equip an Air Force that can meet these challenges both today and tomorrow. When I was commissioned in 1983, we had not fought in combat since my dad came home from Vietnam. The Cold War was in its final years, and there was no conflict on the horizon. This all changed in 1991 when we launched Operation Desert Storm. When the war ended, the Air Force stayed. From Operations Northern and Southern Watch to follow-on campaigns in the Balkans during Operations Deliberate Force and then Allied Force, Through the last 15 years of Operations Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, Inherent Resolve, and Resolute Support, the Air Force has been in continuous combat for 25 years. While we're extremely proud of our contributions to these operations, it has taken its toll on our ability to properly balance capability, capacity, and readiness. When combined with unpredictable budgets and the devastating impacts of sequestration, I am acutely aware that if confirmed, I will be taking the reins of the smallest and oldest Air Force in our 69-year history with significant readiness challenges. But where there is challenge, there is opportunity. And I believe it is the obligation and duty of senior leaders to offer the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Congress creative solutions to our most complex challenges. We are the service known throughout our history for innovation and breaking barriers. From the earliest days of manned flight, to breaking the sound barrier, to reaching the outer limits of space, to fielding advanced stealth technology, we are the service you rely on to push the limits of innovation. It's in our bloodline. We've faced challenging times before and overcome them with ideas. Over 90% of today's Air Force joined after 9/11. They have never known a day when we were not at war. As I speak, airmen stand watch with our nation's most destructive weapons in the nuclear enterprise. They sit alert and will scramble when called upon to defend our homeland. They work side by side with their fellow soft warriors in the most remote corners of the globe to build partner capacity and hunt down our enemies. They're flying global mobility missions to deliver supplies for humanitarian relief or personnel for a complex joint mission. They're flying combat over Iraq and Syria, providing top cover for the joint and coalition teams as we deliver a lasting defeat to ISIL. And they're operating 12 constellations of satellites, providing everything from an uninterrupted GPS signal to an unblinking eye on our adversaries. These airmen, proud members of the profession of arms, provide the oxygen the joint team breathes. This is who we are, your Air Force. We operate from a capsule below the surface, to a combat controller or cyber warrior on the surface, to a cockpit at all altitudes above the surface, to a constellation in the outer reaches of space. We're everywhere. We know who we are, and we know what we're expected to deliver for the joint team. Air power. If confirmed, it will be my honor to work every day with Secretary James to create the environment where great ideas get a hearing, where barriers are crushed, where airmen and their families thrive, and where warfighting excellence remains our top focus. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. On the issue of the B-21 bomber, do you know what the independent cost estimate associated with the winning bid was, roughly? Is it $23.5 billion?
Yes, sir. That is the independent cost estimate.
And the aircraft per unit cost associated with the winning bid was about $556 million, is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
And the Air Force budget request development is about $1.36 billion, is that right?
Yes, sir.
The Air Force released an artist conception of the B-21.
Yes, sir.
The Air Force released the top-tier suppliers for the B-21.
Yes, sir.
I'm having a difficult time understanding how the public disclosure of a single contract award value funded from an unclassified budget request is going to give the enemy more information on the capabilities of a new bomber than what the Air Force has already disclosed. All I can see is that keeping it a secret deprives the American taxpayer the transparency and accountability they deserve. Can you explain what new information our enemies might learn from the release of the contract award value that they couldn't learn from the information the Air Force has already released?
Yes, sir. And Chairman, I agree with you. And I believe that if we're not transparent with the American people on the cost of this weapon system through its elected leadership, then we have a good chance of losing this program.
I thank you very much for that. During the Air Force posture hearing on March 3rd, General Welch testified in reference to long-range readiness issues that need investment, quote, "That will take us 8 to 10 years once we have a chance to reset the force from what we're doing today," which is not going to happen. Obviously, the issue is sequestration and what it's doing. And we know what it's doing as far as acquisition is concerned because all you have to do is count. But talk to us a little bit about the effect on the men and women that you just adequately and appropriately praised in your opening statement on how they can do their job and what effect it has on retention, particularly, very frankly, on pilot retention. Maybe you could, for the record, give us your views on what I think, at least in my view, is almost an emergency situation given the events that are taking place in the world and the changes in the world since 2011, when in our act of incredible cowardice enacted sequestration because we didn't have the guts to make the budget cuts that were necessary.
Thanks, Chairman. When I think about retention, I think about it in two areas: quality of service and quality of life. And when it comes to quality of service, our airmen, when they join, are looking to be the very best they can be. Pilots who don't fly, controllers who don't control, cyber warriors who don't operate because they're not given the resources to do so. Morale goes down and they vote with their feet. When we were sequestered in 2015, we grounded 13 fighter squadrons that stopped flying. We're still recovering from that effort, and if we're sequestered again, it'll be even worse.
And retention, are you beginning to feel the effects of this lack of flying hours? I've been told that our pilots now are flying less hours than Russian and Chinese pilots are per month. And do you agree with, I believe it was the Chief of Staff of the Army who stated before this committee that we are putting the lives of the men and women who are serving at greater risk?
Yes, sir. The reality is it's a mixed story because where we're flying a significant number of hours is where we're stationed forward. So if all crews are in the Middle East are actually at a high state of readiness and they're all flying a significant number of hours, the bill payers to allow that level of readiness forward is what's happening at home station. So at home station, sir, you are absolutely correct. We're not flying the number of hours that we used to fly. There's a number of issues that contribute to that, not the least of which is a shortage of critical skills in our maintenance force. And when you add that up to the age of the aircraft that makes them harder and harder to keep airborne, that has both contributed to a less number of flying hours we have available for training.
And isn't it true that a B-1 squadron just came back with something like 6 aircraft out of 20 that were operational? Isn't that a story that I've heard?
Yes, sir, you have. When I was deployed forward as the Air Component Commander, I enjoyed upwards of 95% on average mission-capable rates across every fleet that was forward. That was the B-1, that was the F-16, A-10, every one. So we had the parts, we had the supervision, we had the maintainers. That's what we pushed forward. I knew that if I went back to the home station, that was the bill payer to get me that level of readiness. So back home at DIAS, at those other locations that you have talked about, the B-1s, when they come home, they require a significant recovery time when they come back from combat operations.
Well, I don't mean to get parochial here, but we just had a vote that I was trying to fix the problem, and it wasn't just Democrats that voted against it. It was Republicans that voted against it as well, and members of this committee. I think it's a very heavy burden for them to carry, given the state of our military today and the situations and challenges that we face in the world, which are just epitomized by the terrible tragedy on Orlando. I hope that the voters understand that a good faith effort was made and it was turned down 4 votes short by members, some of the members of this committee. I'm embarrassed. I thank you, General.
Thank you.
General, you have the responsibility of modernizing the bomber and the ICBM force. Are there any particular authorities that you think are necessary to help you accomplish those tasks which you don't have? Sir,
actually, the authorities that you've pushed recently to service chiefs are very helpful. And the way I look at those authorities, it's in both authorities, but also increased accountability for a service chief. So in the 2 areas where I'm focused, number 1 is I am the lead requirements officer for all major weapon systems. It's my responsibility to ensure that we don't have requirements creep that increases cost or increases schedule on any of our programs. That's number 1. And number 2, that I now have more authority and accountability in some of the milestone decisions, specifically Milestone A and Milestone B, that allow a service chief to have an input on a program as it goes forward.
Very good. And so you feel at this point confident you have the legal authorities to bring these programs online in a very cost-effective way?
Sir, I do, and I would highlight that those authorities also, many of those authorities reside with the Secretary of the Air Force, so I believe it's my job to actually work with her as we keep these programs on track.
We've had an ongoing debate in the committee and in the Congress about the plans to retire the A-10 aircraft, which is an extraordinarily effective close air support platform. And the Air Force seems, at least temporarily, to adjusting to keeping it. But longer term, this issue is going to come up again and again, and it raises the issue of how do you develop and can you develop the same capabilities if at some point the A-10 is retired? Can you give us some thoughts about that?
Yes, sir. My commitment to you, if confirmed, is that we will cover down on this mission set for the joint team, and I will take ownership of that. When it comes to the A-10, I'm actually as concerned about the A-10 community as I am about the A-10 platform, because the A-10 community is actually our PhD force when it comes to close air support, and they set the bar for not only the joint team, but for the coalition team. Anybody who does close air support, they try to reach the level that the A-10 community has been able to achieve. So my focus is going to be on ensuring that I go back to the doctors of CAS, the A-10 fleet and the A-10 operators, and say, what is the future of close air support? That's the conversation we need to have. We need to maintain what we have for the current fight, but where are we going in the future? Why is it that I only get a minute and a half of trigger pull on a 30-millimeter bullet? Why don't I get 10 minutes? And why is not every bullet precision guided? Why do I spend so much time having to figure out who is actually friend and foe on the ground when we have technology to be able to help us do that? Why is it that I have to do all the work for collateral damage estimates that when I have the machine and that can help me do that? So for me, it's a matter of where we're going in the future, and my commitment to you is that I will take this on.
Thank you very much, General. Another issue that we've been dealing with, and we've seen some movement, is deploying more and more enlisted pilots for remotely piloted aircraft. There are various models in the history of military warfare. The one that always has sort of some impact with me is that helicopter pilots in Vietnam, particularly Army, were mostly warrant officers with some officers, but the vast majority warrant officers. They were extremely capable. In fact, they had more hours in that aircraft than anybody else. And it seems to me that model could be applied much more vigorously. I know the Air Force is taking steps. Can you elaborate on what you're doing, what you want to do?
Yes, sir. So for us, the remotely piloted aircraft, or RPA community, actually is the largest number of pilots that currently serve in the Air Force. We have over 1,300 RPA pilots currently serving. The next closest second of any community is a C-17 with just shy of 800. So the RPA is part of the fabric of the Air Force. So for me, this is a question of what is the future of this business as we go forward, and how does the professional enlisted corps that we enjoy fit into that enterprise? And we're committed to have enlisted pilots, and we're already starting on a program. We'll start this fall. We'll have our first class of enlisted RQ-4 pilots that will go through. They will graduate in 1 year, and right behind them will be another class, followed by another class. And so we're focused on moving forward in the RQ-4 to ensure that our enlisted pilots are fully a part of that weapon system. And so I see this as one of the major growth industries in the Air Force, and I think this is the exact right path to be on. And we have a model for it that we know works. We actually started off flying satellites when we had nothing but officers, and we transitioned over a few years from officers with the scientific backgrounds to officers with more political science kind of backgrounds, and then we made it into enlisted. And today, 50% of the satellite constellations are flown and managed by the enlisted force. So we're taking that same very successful model and applying it to the RPA model, and we're on track.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just to follow up, General, in other words, from your comments on the A-10, at this time, it's best not to retire them, but to look at other options for follow-on. Is that a correct statement?
Sir, right now we're looking at that as an option. The challenge will be to keep a capability so that the fight that we're in today, there's no degradation to any of the soldiers, sailors, or Marines, or my airmen that are on the ground.
So we should not be retiring them now.
Not in the near term, no, sir.
I thank you, Colonel Roger Wicker, United States Air Force Reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, you said you're going to give us your personal views, regardless of the administration's policy. Let me ask you this. Chairman McCain has repeatedly referenced the terror and carnage caused by Assad's barrel bombs that are deployed by Syrian aircraft. Our chairman has made the point, and I agree with him, that as evil as ISIS is, it's the barrel bombs and air attacks that are causing most of the civilian casualties in Syria. Is that correct in your view?
Yes, sir.
And do you agree with General Petraeus, who testified before us a few months ago, when he said that we have the capability to take out Assad's air force?
I do.
Did the presence of Russian air forces in Syria impact the administration's decision not to implement a no-fly zone last year?
Sir, I don't want to know whether it had any impact on the administration's decision. I will tell you from a military standpoint, as a service chief, if confirmed, it absolutely complicated the situation that we were facing.
Okay, it complicated the situation, and did it rule it out, or was it a close call? And do you think that should be revisited?
Sir, whether it be revisited or not would certainly be a decision that would be above mine. Let me tell you, as an airman who has planned and executed no-fly zones, this is a capability that we retain. We know how to do it, and at the end, the question is, can we do it? The answer absolutely is yes. But there are three fundamental questions that I think have to be answered before I would ever recommend that as an option. The first is, I would have to have the authority to shoot down and kill anybody who violated the no-fly zone. Since ISIL doesn't have an air force, that would mean I would have to have the authority to shoot down and kill Russian or Syrian aircraft. The second is I would have to have a clear understanding of exactly what the objective was on the ground below the no-fly zone. And the objective was to do humanitarian safe zone or refugee return. That would require some indigenous ground force that I would be able to control that, because I can't control that from the air. And the third would be a clear-eyed decision that I would have to divert resources from the current campaign to do the no-fly zone. But with the answer to those three questions, sir, we can do that.
Do you believe a no-fly zone would have saved lives of innocent civilians in Syria?
Sir, a no-fly zone alone that would have stopped aircraft that were going out to bomb civilians absolutely would have had an impact.
Thank you. Let me ask about a replacement of the legacy Huey helicopters, some of which are nearly 40 years old. These helicopters are used to secure our nuclear weapons for Global Strike Command, as well as the Air Force District of Washington's mission to ensure continuity of government operations. Some members of this committee are interested in learning more about the Air Force strategy to replace these legacy Huey helicopters. We would like to obtain a description of the Air Force helicopter requirements, including how requirements differ between Global Strike Command and other missions such as the Air Force District of Washington. We are also interested in obtaining a life cycle cost analysis of alternatives that includes mixed fleet versus single fleet solutions. If confirmed, will you commit to providing this committee with a report on the Air Force acquisition strategy for replacing these Huey helicopters?
Yes, sir, I will.
Do you think you could get this report to us by October 1st of this year?
Sir, yes, I believe we can.
Thank you very much. And now I yield back the time.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for visiting with me earlier this week. I recently visited the Niagara Air Reserve Station with my colleague, Senator Schumer, and we're pleased to see the progress underway in converting the 914 Airlift Wing to the KC-135 mission. However, as you and I discussed, there's not yet a simulator scheduled to be moved to Niagara Falls to sustain the training that's necessary, even though there's a building waiting. Will we have your assurance that the excellent airmen of the 914th will have all the tools they need to sustain their expertise, including a KC-135 flight simulator on the grounds of the air station?
Yes, ma'am, and I will also tell you that my mother, who's born and raised in Niagara Falls, would go after me if I didn't.
Thank you. As you know, General, the New York Air National Guard's 109th Airlift Wing operates our only fleet of LC-130 Skybirds, which permit takeoff and landing on ice and snowpack. Given the evolving terrain and increased commercial and military activity in the polar regions of the world as a result of global warming, these aircraft provide a critical capability to national security as well as to scientific research. At the moment, however, there's no recapitalization plan in progress for these aircraft. If confirmed, will you commit the resources to ensuring this fleet of high-demand aircraft remains operationally capable?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. New York's pararescue jumpers are transported to those in need via the Combat Rescue Helicopter, an aircraft undergoing a modernization program. I was thrilled when I learned, however, that the Combat Rescue Helicopters belonging to the reserve components will not receive upgrades until the last 3 years of a 10-year cycle. For now, they will receive refurbished helicopters. I think this is unacceptable and not in line with the concept of total force integration that Secretary James and General Welsh have generally adopted. Should you be confirmed, will you see to it that the combat rescue helicopters and the reserve components receive concurrent modernization along with their active duty counterparts?
Yes, ma'am, I will, but if I could add, our current plan, because we're getting attrition reserve helicopters back that we've lost in combat, those attrition reserve aircraft, which will be HH-60G models, the newest aircraft, are actually going first to the Air National Guard. And then we'll, replace the oldest in the fleet. And then the reason right now the Air National Guard is on the back end of the combat rescue helicopter is that as we go through that, they're actually going to have the newest helicopters that we'll replace.
Okay. According to the most recent annual report of sexual harassment and violence at the military service academies for 2014 and 2015 academic year, despite being similar in size to both the Naval Academy and the U.S. Military Academy, the Air Force Academy had almost double the number of sexual assault reports, with 49 reports as compared to 17 at West Point and 25 at the Naval Academy. Have you been able to look at this information, and do you have any explanation about the larger number of reports at the Air Force Academy compared to other academies, and what measures are in place to prevent and respond to sexual assault at the Air Force Academy?
Thanks, ma'am. And on a personal note, I want to personally thank you for your passion on this issue and keeping the pressure on. I've actually thought a lot about our conversation, and you've given me several things to think about, and I actually shared that with my staff, and I look forward to working with you on this issue if confirmed. At the Air Force Academy, the numbers you're looking at, I believe, are just the restricted reports. If you take a look at a combination of restricted and unrestricted, you actually don't see the large jumps. But the data tell you one thing. The reality is, for me, is what's the culture at the Air Force Academy that makes this crime more and more difficult over time to actually commit, so that we, not only do we bring in cadets with the right moral background and character that would make this unacceptable in their squadron, but also that then we infuse them and work on that character and build on that character so they can be leaders of character when they come out. And so we're not going to stop or take our foot off the gas until we're to zero.
So I think the discrepancy is between unrestricted and restricted, and unrestricted are the ones where investigation can move forward. So your unrestricted numbers would show that people are comfortable with the investigation. If your restricted numbers are higher, it means they're not comfortable. So when you're reviewing your own protocols at the Air Force Academy, I would look to retaliation and perhaps, investigate what the reason for not reporting is. They may fear retaliation. They may fear it'll harm their careers. So I would dig deep on what the climate is like within the Academy to get those unrestricted numbers up.
Yes, ma'am. I will do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, General.
Good morning, ma'am.
General, do you believe that the current mix of capabilities in our nuclear forces, and by that I mean the triad of our delivery vehicles, the gravity bombs, standoff weapons, the forward deployed tactical weapons that we have, do you believe that that will continue to be necessary for deterrence in the 21st century?
I do, ma'am.
Do you believe that there are any of those capabilities that would be unnecessary?
I do not.
Given the investment of Russia and China in their nuclear arsenals, and in particular concerning statements by Russian officials about the limited use of nuclear weapons, would you say it's important to preserve the variety in U.S. nuclear forces to ensure the President has flexibility in his ability to respond?
Yes, ma'am, and I would add to that the nuclear command and control that we're responsible for the nation to ensure that we tie those three legs together.
Aside from capabilities, do you see reductions in number of nuclear weapons as being likely in the near term? And do you believe that any reductions in nuclear forces should only be made as part of a negotiated, bilateral, and verifiable agreement?
Ma'am, I would defer to the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense on this. I will tell you that as a service chief, if confirmed, my job will be to execute according to the guidance. So we are on track right now to execute against the START II treaty. And so we're making the associated changes according to that direction.
Would you personally recommend against any unilateral reduction in U.S. nuclear forces?
My personal opinion is I would recommend against that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And General, when we met last month, we discussed Milestone A, that decision for the GBSD. And I'm also concerned that the LRSO has yet to receive its Milestone A certification as well. And both of these programs, I believe, are absolutely essential for the Air Force's component of our nuclear deterrent. Do I have your commitment to resolve these two issues as soon as you possibly can?
Yes, ma'am, you do.
And also, as you know, the Department has embarked on a so-called third offset initiative, and the continued advancement of potential adversaries ensure that the issue of technological superiority and innovation will be something that you confront if confirmed. Are there specific technologies that you believe will be key to ensuring future superiority, and how do you view the balance between investing in these current requirements such as readiness and also to be able to balance that with our future needs?
Yes, ma'am. And as I said in my opening statement, innovation and breaking barriers is something that you would expect the Air Force to do. As we look forward in the third offset strategy, it's about actually tying together three grids in new ways. The first is the sensor grid, which looks at 6 domains, air, land, sea, space, cyber, and undersea, and says, how do we use all of those domains in a way that we can actually pull those sensors together and fuse that information and use machine-to-machine and autonomy to be able to produce decision quality information for a commander. And then we have to tie that grid into an effects grid. And the effects grid is to all the members of the joint team and what we bring that's beyond platform. It goes to our special forces. It goes to what we're doing at sea. It's to tying those together and what effects are we trying to create. And so there's some significant investment there. But the coin of the realm, and where I think the Air Force is going to be focused, is on the third grid, which is command and control. Because it's how we tie this all together, for old and new, manned and unmanned, penetrating and standoff, through all those domains. It's the Air Force that has a core mission of command and control, and we do this for the joint team. So I believe it's going to be where we're going to spend most of our time investing to pull those three grids together.
Thank you for that very thorough answer. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General, it was good to visit with you in the office, and congratulations on the nomination for this important post. Senator Warner, my colleague, and I today did something that we do once a year, which is really fun. It's just we have a coffee for all of the Academy nominees that are about to report to all the service academies. And I'm here to tell you that we're sending some great Virginians to Colorado Springs, and they're very, very excited to report. I guess on June 30 is when they're out 2 weeks from today. Very, very excited. A couple of questions. You and I talked a lot about readiness in my office, and you have testified and spoken briefly with the chair about this, that there's a projection because of the readiness shortfalls that it's going to take to the mid to late 2020s to return to the readiness level that is adequate. We have just passed off the Senate floor of the NDAA. Does the funding and end strength and policies contained in the NDAA that we passed, will that enable you to stay on that same track? Not that that track is so great, 2020's mid or late, but does the NDAA we passed enable you to stay on that track with respect to recovering readiness?
Sir, it does. And the number one issue for us, that's the limiter for producing and increasing our readiness beyond producing it for what we consume, is manpower, and specifically maintenance manpower. So your support for our increase in manpower is the number one issue for us. And every service creates and sustains readiness differently. For an Air Force, there's 5 key elements that we've got to keep in balance, and any one of them can be a limiter. The first is the critical skills, and it's beyond the pilot. It's the maintainers, it's the air traffic controllers, it's the munitions specialists, it's all of the folks that have fingerprints on an airplane before it takes off. The second is weapon system sustainment, and it's all the depot work and the required maintenance that keep that airplane sustained. And the third is a flying hour program, which is operations and maintenance to get that airplane airborne and fund it for its mission. And then the fourth is the critical infrastructure, the ranges, and the exercises that allow us to train to full spectrum readiness. And the final is time, which is op-tempo relief. Right now, the 2 limiting factors that keep us from being able to build readiness beyond what we are actually consuming is people and time. So what you did in the NDAA to support our increase in people is critical, and then we will manage the time based on the op-tempo and the demands on the Air Force.
One of the points you mentioned was my next question, and that's this maintainer shortfall. You've testified to us before about that. Now, the end strength on active that you're currently working with is 317,000. It's obviously larger when you add Guard and Reserve to it, but just because that end number might be okay, that doesn't mean that within the number there aren't some disparities. And talk to us a little bit more about the maintainer shortfall and what are the plans that you would have as the chief to deal with that issue.
So right now we project that we have 4,000 maintainers short of what we need. So a significant number of the additional manpower coming in is going to go into maintenance. Right now we put all the...
And you layer that, the maintenance is layered between active Guard and Reserve.
It is.
I've noticed this down at Langley. You do a
Yes,
very
sir.
good job of having, it's a real seamless operation between active Guard and Reserve on maintenance billet.
Yes, sir. It's actually that same way across the force. I mean, if you go to the cockpit of a C-17 and ask
Right.
who's active, who's Guard and Reserve, all 3 hands will go up very often. So we truly are one Air Force. So we're bringing those maintainers in to make sure that we bring in the right skill sets. The challenge, of course, in bringing those maintainers is all the ones that will come in will be what we call 3 levels, which is early entry that can do basic maintenance. That will take us up to 2 years to get them fully trained, and then it'll take us up to 5 years before they're supervisors. So what we got to do is manage this across the Guard, Reserve, and active based on where our experience is to ensure that we can continue the mission at the op-tempo that we are in today, which I do not expect is going to come down during my tenure if confirmed, while we would also advance and bring on new weapon systems for the future.
Can I ask one last question? You talked a lot about the Air Force as being a key innovator, and that's the case. A lot of the new missions that you have looking forward are space, cyber, and ISR. Talk a little bit with us about your ability to move out on new missions in those domains under the current budget realities.
Yes, sir. The demand signal on the Air Force over the past 15 years has actually been in 4 key areas: space, cyber, ISR, and the nuclear enterprise. That has been the resource growth area in the Air Force. The bill payer for those have been conventional air power and people. And if you take a look at the last 15 years of strategic trades, you'll see that that's why we are where we are today. I'd like to focus, to answer your question, sir, on space, because sometimes history placed the right individual in the right position at the right time. And General John Hyten is absolutely brilliant, and he is changing the way we think about space. And he's got some fairly significant initiatives that I look forward to championing if confirmed. One of them is the Space Mission Force, which takes the force, and actually now he has replicated what we see in the flying business, where as opposed to where we used to be, where most space operators and warriors would come to work and be in the business of primarily monitoring and reporting. Now he's got them thinking about operating in space. And that he's actually built a dwell time so that you spend some time in operations and some time in training. It's changed the culture and the thinking of space, which I think is perhaps one of the most powerful things that he's brought to the team. And the other thing he's done is he's getting us to think about space as an enterprise as opposed to individual pieces and parts. Because any space capability normally has 3 elements to it. There's a constellation, there's an integration that happens within airframes, right, for us, or ground for the Army or the ships. And then there's a ground control element. And they always start lined up in the acquisition plan, and then one of them gets slid. And we haven't had a way in the past to be able to actually realign them. And so General Hyten is leading the way in that, and I think it's powerful.
Great, great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. General, congratulations on your nomination. Thank you for your many years of service, and to your family for their many years of serving alongside you. I want to continue the conversation about readiness from where Senator Kaine left off. I want to call attention to one thing you said in particular, that you, quote, don't expect the op tempo will come down during my tenure, end quote.
If confirmed, yes, sir.
Yes. So for 4 years, you expect the current op tempo to remain at least as high as it is today?
I do, sir.
Secretary Gates, in his memoir, Duty, wrote that the Department of Defense was designed to plan and prepare for war, not to wage war. Now, that's 5 years dated since he left office in December 2011. Do you believe that the department still has that challenge today?
Well, sir, my sense would be, I don't know the context of what he was saying when he wrote it.
So he meant specifically trying to acquire rapidly the capabilities needed for the fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, in MRAP vehicles for ground troops, airborne ISR platforms, wounded warrior care, and so forth. The point being that the Pentagon in some ways is designed to procure the weapons and capabilities for next generation's war as opposed to fight the war it's in right now.
Yes, sir, I think that's an accurate statement, but I will tell you, if confirmed, just again, there are certain capabilities that we bring to this fight today that, if confirmed, I'm absolutely committed to ensure that there is no degradation, and one of those is close air support.
Good, thank you. Now I want to turn to a very specific question of readiness beyond the general discussion we've had this morning to the sortie effectiveness rates for deployed aircraft in the fight against the Islamic State. We discussed this in your office call last month. As I told you, I continue to hear through official and personal channels from the pilots who are flying aircraft over Iraq and Syria's territory, as well as their families, that tell me some pretty harrowing stories about those effectiveness rates. You mentioned in our conversation that you thought the rates were in the 90% range, but that you would check on that. Do you have any further information on that matter?
Yes, sir. I went back and checked, and that's still accurate. For aircraft that we're flying forward, we tend to average around a 90% mission-capable rate. But the bill payer that is nowhere near that, if you went to every home station that generated those aircraft and those crews and sent them forward, you would see them hovering slightly around the 60 to 70% rate at best.
So in hearing from pilots and their families about maintenance issues that prevent aircraft from taking off, require the early return to base, require them to fly without their full spectrum of aircraft systems, or to extend missions to perhaps dangerous lengths because the relief aircraft can't take off, I'm hearing from that small, less than 10% of all cases?
Yes, sir, I think that's accurate, and I could take that to get you more accurate numbers if you like.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Now I want to turn to nuclear modernization, which you discussed with Senator Fisher and some others at a specific level about some matters, but I want to speak at both a general and even more specific level about the mindset reflected in nuclear modernization. In February 2011, in his message to the Senate about New START, President Obama stated that, quote, I intend to modernize or replace the triad of strategic nuclear delivery systems, a heavy bomber, air-launched cruise missile, an ICBM, a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine. Now, since then, the Air Force has been examining alternatives for a replacement for the air-launched cruise missile called the Long-Range Standoff Missile and the Minuteman ICBM called the Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent. Both systems expected a Milestone A approval earlier this year, yet they've both been deferred by Undersecretary of Defense Frank Kendall. I worry that this is inconsistent with the President's commitment and could delay the fielding of these critical replacements. So first, at a general level, do you share the President's oft-stated commitment to replace the nuclear air-launched cruise missile and Minuteman ICBM, or do you believe that conditions have changed that we might want to reconsider or delay those modernization programs?
No, sir, I absolutely believe they need to be modernized.
Senator Fisher asked you for your personal commitment about moving those Milestone A decisions along. You said, yes, ma'am, you do have that commitment. Could we be more precise? Could you give me a timeline in which we expect the decisions for both the LRSO and GBSD?
Yes, Senator. So for the GBSD, we're expecting a Milestone A decision in August of this year, and we're still on track to meet that. We expecting to put out a request for proposal out to industry within the next 2 weeks. And also, on the same time, within the next 2 weeks, we should have a milestone A decision on the long-range strike.
Thank you for both. Finally, on June 6, in a public speech, the Deputy National Security Advisor said, quote, "The administration has already made it plain our concerns about how the modernization budget will force difficult trade-offs in the coming decades, and the President will continue to review these plans as he considers how to hand the baton off to his successor," end quote. General, to your knowledge, has the Department of Defense or the Department of the Air Force been asked by the White House or National Security Council staff to examine whether changes can or should be made to proposed plans for nuclear modernization?
No, sir, not in any of the meetings I've been in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you and your family for your commitment and service. I'd like to turn to the issue of headquarters cuts. With the Pacific Air Force headquartered in Hawaii, I'm very much concerned with possible reductions to staff, especially when the full set of requirements are not taken into consideration. What actions will the Air Force take, should you be confirmed, in the near future to ensure that any cuts will not be made across the board and that the capabilities and necessary tasks will be taken into consideration?
Ma'am, when the original 20% reduction was given to the service, to the department, 2 organizations actually took those cuts up front, the United States Air Force and the Joint Staff. And we did that to delay, to keep from delaying the pain over time. And so it was a bit of a rip the Band-Aid off to be able to take those cuts up front and then reorganize the Air Force accordingly to be able to ensure that we continued our mission. One of the examples of that was we stood up an organization, Installation Mission Support Center, that now consolidates all installations in the United States Air Force. We had 1,500 airmen and civilians involved in maintaining and running our bases. By consolidating into a single center, we're down to 350. So that's just one example of how we've taken the 20% redux that we were given and reorganized ourselves to be more efficient.
And you will continue with that kind of an approach to any further reductions that you are going to be asked to take?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Acquisition reform, the Air Superiority 2030 Flight Plan introduced in May of 2016 has some insights about the way that the Air Force is responding to the current threat environment. And the report stated, and I quote, "The traditional acquisition approach is not agile and results in late-to-need delivery of critical warfighting capabilities and technologically superior forces," and voiced a concern that our acquisition system prevents the timely delivery of the capabilities that our warfighters need to succeed. What is the top recommendation that you would suggest to improve the major system acquisition outcomes?
Ma'am, actually, it would be to use the authorities that now are moving towards service chiefs to do my job, to ensure that I keep requirements solid, that I don't allow any requirements creep, that I hold industry accountable for delivering on the contracts that we sign, and ensuring that I'm doing my part for the milestone A and milestone B decisions to ensure that we're putting the right programs forward to meet the warfighter needs.
Thank you. In these times of budget constraints, I think that you responded to some of the questions from Senator Kaine. In Hawaii, we have Joint Base Pearl Harbor, HICM, and we have both a strong active Air Force presence there as well as the Guard and Reserves. So what are your guiding principles in terms of active Guard and Reserve forces working together?
Ma'am, we are at the point in our Air Force where we actually cannot accomplish our mission without the Guard and Reserve. We talked earlier about that, you can walk into a C-17 cockpit and they're going to find one of each in a single cockpit. That's how we look across the Air Force. We're taking a series of initiatives through high-velocity analysis and looking and working with the adjutant generals of the various states who are involved in our deliberations to ensure that we optimize in each of the missions that we're required to do, what's the right mix between active, Guard, and Reserve. One of our biggest initiatives actually this year is going to be to start up a integrated wing concept at in South Carolina at Seymour Johnson, actually. And what we're doing there is we're actually combining the reserve and the active duty in a single organization. And we're working our way through the seams that occur and the authorities that occur to ensure that that organization can actually operate as a single wing. And perhaps the best outcome of this concept is going to be we're going to have a better understanding in each of the components of the pressures, the challenges, and the motivations that cause each one to sign up and serve, and how we can work more effectively together to be able to accomplish the mission.
So you're doing this in South Carolina, so is the intent to see how this can function and be implemented, and then you would do that in other places, such as in Hawaii?
And I correct myself. I think Seymour Johnson's in North Carolina, geographically
okay.
challenged.
North Carolina.
But we are doing that, yes, ma'am. And based on expected success there as a pilot program, we'll then take a look at other organizations and where we can bring that same model.
Just one more thing. Senator Gillibrand brought up several sexual assault, and I appreciate your commitment to influence the climate at the Air Force Academy. And as you know, I am on the Air Force Academy Board of Visitors. So your commitment to prevent sexual assault, harassment, retaliation, I think that's really critical. And it's an ongoing concern for many of us on this committee, so I thank you for that commitment.
You have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, General.
Morning, ma'am.
Thank you for all that you do for the country. I wanted to ask you what your viewpoint was on the performance of the Compass Call mission package and the important role that it plays with ensuring that we disrupt enemies' command and control.
Ma'am, it's critical, and I believe I can speak on behalf of the combatant commanders, that it's critical in every one of their area of operations.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up and ask you, as best as you can answer in this forum, can you explain to us why this is an urgent requirement that we actually place this mission package on a more survivable and effective aircraft?
Yes, ma'am. The reality is that this mission, electronic attack, is actually becoming more and more critical, especially as we look to the global challenges we face, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea especially, but it's also playing a significant role in the fight against violent extremism. The challenge with the C-130 is that it doesn't operate at the altitudes primarily that we need to be able to put the footprint down on the target that we're trying to service. So our challenge is any time delay in being able to get this into an aircraft that can climb to a higher altitude is going to diminish over that same time frame our support to the combatant commanders.
And so if we fail to authorize the request that the Air Force has made to use existing rapid acquisition authorities to rehost the Compass Call mission equipment on the proper airframe, will that result in a 4 to 6 year delay in providing this vital capability to our combatant commanders in a more survivable and effective aircraft?
Yes, ma'am, and I would add to that that if we have to do further integration of that equipment on this new aircraft, you could add even 2 more years to that.
So based on the request that the Air Force has made, do you continue to believe that it's important for Congress to authorize in this year's defense authorization the request to use rapid acquisition authorities to rehost the Compass Call, given the fact that this is such an important need for combatant commanders?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely I do.
Thank you, General.
Yes, ma'am.
General, I would, Compass Call rehost program is important, obviously, to our combatant commanders, and I join Senator Ayotte in urging the Air Force to field this warfighting capability as expeditiously as possible. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, General Goldfein. As you know from your time in New Mexico, my home state is home to the Air Force Research Laboratory as well as 2 NNSA laboratories. I want to start by just inviting you to come visit and see the great work that goes on at both AFRL and Sandia for the Air Force specifically. So I want to ask broadly, what role do you see our defense labs playing in Air Force modernization?
Yes, sir, and I'll go back to my opening statement. I mean, we are the service I believe you rely on for innovation and breaking barriers, and that happens in our labs to a large extent. So the technologies that they're looking at right now, whether you want to look at hypersonics or new engine technology, small satellite technology, these are all things that are going to be potential game changers in the future.
I would add directed energy to that list.
Amen.
You know, despite the great work that they do at those labs, this committee has expressed its concern in the NDAA that it takes an unreasonable amount of time to hire experienced individuals at the defense labs. Sometimes it takes over a year to get somebody in place, which just seems like far too long. And the result of that is that a sizable percentage of the authorized billets at those DoD labs remain vacant due to lengthy delays as well as competition from the private sector, where you can get placed in a relatively reasonable amount of time. So if confirmed, can you make speeding this hiring process a priority for our defense laboratories?
Yes, sir, I will. And I will tell you that I absolutely align with Secretary Carter that we are in a war on talent.
Yeah.
And one of the initiatives that is under his Force of the Future initiatives, it allows us to actually go directly to a university and hire talent from the university. What we've done previously up to now is we've told our talented young men and women who are considering joining us to go get on USA Jobs,
right,
post all their resumes,
yeah,
and maybe we'll get back to them in 6 months.
Yeah.
They're gone. So it's unacceptable in this environment. And so everything that the Secretary is doing, anything I can do to make that easier, I will do.
Great. I appreciate that. I think that focus will be incredibly important for getting the kind of talent that we need in what is becoming a very competitive environment with the private sector. Regarding the Huey replacement discussion that Senator Wicker brought up, is the Air Force going to, you know, obviously that'll be competed, but will you consider the same platform as the combat rescue helicopter, the HH-60 or Whiskey?
So right now it's a different set of requirements.
Okay.
So the question will be, you know, clearly when you can get one platform that can do multiple missions, there's certainly great efficiencies.
Yeah.
But right now, as I've looked at the requirements and clearly have confirmed something that I will get deeply involved in, making sure we keep those requirements firm. Right now, there's enough differences between what you would need to be able to fight your way into a point to rescue someone versus what you would do to provide security for the missile fields.
Okay. Given the dramatic improvements we've seen in laser, in particular technology and microwaves as well in the last few years, what role do you see directed energy playing in the third offset?
Sir, I describe it as silent sabotage. Right now, when I want to, or when we want to place firepower on the enemy, they and everyone else in the area knows we're there. What we need is a capability to create an effect and not have them know exactly where it came from or who. I think directed energy is going to provide that for us, and it's going to be especially effective in our special ops forces, but it will also have conventional effects as well. So I'm excited about the technology, and if confirmed, I'll certainly push it.
Great. I look forward to working with you. Thanks for your service.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I've always said that General Walsh's greatest asset was Betty. And I have observed over the last few weeks that, in my opinion, your greatest asset is sitting behind you in green. So I'm observing that Dawn is going to be replacing Betty. Do you have a problem with that?
No, sir.
No, okay. The thing was brought up by one of the questioners here just a few minutes ago that back in April of 2013, we grounded some 17 combat coded units, squadrons. That lasted for about 4 months. I think that we had some 25% of the pilots were uncertified during that time, had to be retrained. Of course, you know what happens to something sitting down there in terms of maintenance and all that. Have you ever calculated the cost, and have you come to the conclusion that we lost money on that deal?
Sir, I haven't calculated the cost monetarily, but I will tell you that the cost personally for those individuals that were affected, because it wasn't only the pilots that stopped flying, it was the depot maintenance folks who stopped maintaining.
Oh, I know that.
The air traffic controllers. Mm-hmm. It was the impact on across the force. And what we can't calculate is the number of folks who decided that, you know what, if this is how I'm going to be treated, I'm not going to stay with the company.
Yeah, I've actually talked to some of those at the time. And of course, we had the first effect of that from Tinker Air Force Base. In terms of the refueler, the KC-46, Right now, General McDew made the statement that our KC-135 and KC-10 refueling fleet is stretched at a point of near bending, and I'm concerned about our ability to flex that force to another region of the world if we need to do. Do you agree with this statement?
Sir, I do, and I'd like to, if I can, highlight the magicians in our depots. Quite frankly, there's only one reason we have aircraft still flying after 50 years. It's because of the quality individuals we have there at our depots that keep them flying.
Well, you know, the KC-135 is 50 years old now, and the KC-10, 30 years old. But now we shift to the fighters. We get the same problem there, except it's a little bit different. We're actually are training now with T-6s, T-1s, and T-38s. The T-38s, again, are 50 years old.
Yes, sir.
Now, they're projecting that before we are able to start replacing that, it's going to be 2024. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's how
And then now, I don't know how many years it'll take to rotate those around so till the T-38 is finally totally replaced, because I haven't calculated that. But can we hold on to them?
Sir, we're going to have
I mean, here's the problem that we have, and it's using your quotes when you said that you talked about, and this is two revealing quotes. The most pressing challenge for the United States Air Force is the rise of peer competitors with advanced military capabilities and rivaling our own. Now, we're talking about the third generation, and we've already acknowledged that the training in the T-38 is not adequate to train someone for fifth generation fighters. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
So it's almost as if we're sitting around saying everything is going to be happening in a vacuum, when in fact it's not. And if you look, and even today, if we're not getting adequate training for those our new competitors, what's it going to be like, 10, 15 years from now? I mean, is that one of the things that bothers you? Is one of your greater concerns?
Sir, it is, and this is a classic case of what a service chief is faced with, which is how do I, with the resources given, if confirmed, get the right balance between capability, capacity, and readiness. And there are trades that we make. And so when we look at, for instance, bringing on the new trainer aircraft, that's one of the trades that we have to make to push that to the right till 2024. And so that's going to require us to keep the T-38 flying longer. And it's just one of the inevitable trades you have to make.
Because we got spoiled over the last few decades because we didn't have competitors out there that were almost equal with us or even advancing from our current status. So that's one of the great concerns that I have, and I know you and I have talked about that, and you're going to be addressing that.
Yes, sir, I will.
Look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank your family for being here as well, General. I'd like to congratulate you on your nomination. In our last meeting, you and I talked a bit about the 434th Air Refueling Wing at Grissom Air Reserve Base in Indiana and the basing process for the next-gen KC-46. When do you anticipate we'll see another KC-46 basing opportunity for a reserve-led unit?
Yes, sir. The next ones up are in we call MOB 4, Mobility Base 4, which will be the next one. And we expect a rollout of the candidate announcement within the next 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. And in the last basing decision, the Air Force emphasized the importance of reserve-led associate units. That aligns with the recommendation of the Air Force Commission report in 2014 that recommended expanding the number of associate units in the Air Force. Do you anticipate that you'll be creating more reserve-led associate wings in the future?
I do, Senator. Right now, we actually have got very successfully active duty officers that are actually commanding guard wings, reserve officers who are commanding active duty wings. And so we've already done this kind of a mix, and we look at every organization, then look at the mission and the deploy to dwell and the op tempo that we can sustain there, and how do we optimize all three components to best accomplish the mission. And so as we do this, I expect, if confirmed, that we will see more associations of the future.
The ground-based strategic deterrent provides, I think, an important opportunity for cross-service collaboration between the Air Force and Navy on strategic missiles. I think it's an historic opportunity to leverage research and development, common parts, lessons learned from the Navy's recent Trident modernization program, which can reduce risk, enhance savings, which are critical, and field an extremely capable follow-on to Minuteman III. So is the Air Force committed to commonality as a means to modernize and maintain the triad?
Yes, sir, we are.
And what elements do you see as most applicable for commonality with the ICBM program?
So as you know, in the Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent, the GBSD, one of the aspects of that is that it's an enterprise approach. So as we field that weapon system, it's actually not just the missile, it's the launch, it's the command and control, it's entire enterprise approach. The Navy does the same thing when they look at the submarine force. So I think there's synergy there between how the Navy approaches and how we approach the enterprise that's required to be able to support this mission. And so I think there's various elements, not the least of which is nuclear command and control.
Will you ensure the GBSD acquisition program, the process, prioritizes commonality as an important strategy to increase capability while reducing risk and cost?
Yes, sir, I will.
Thank you. I want to talk to you a little bit about the 122nd Fighter Wing in Fort Wayne, who has conducted numerous missions in support with their A-10 aircraft. We were excited to see that the Air Force has charged the 122nd to continue to wage war, end the war on terror with the F-16. The Air Force's FY17 Force Structure Actions announcement shows Fort Wayne transitioning to F-16s in FY18. Due to concerns raised by this committee and others, these plans may shift a little bit. And I was wondering your assessment of how the Senate and House versions of NDAA impact your ability to carry out force structure changes involving the A-10.
Sir, anything that allows us more funding stability and flexibility to make the kind of key decisions we need to make are helpful for a service chief. Any restrictions we have on being able to move forward obviously hurt us, because as we look at balancing capability, capacity, readiness, we need that kind of flexibility. When it comes to Fort Wayne, as we put forward our options for the Secretary of Defense and the 18 POM, as we've talked about, we may ask your support to delay that transition in order to make sure that we can continue to fight the fight against ISIL.
How do you think it's going to impact your timing as things currently stand?
So I think we're looking at probably 1 year.
Thank you very much. Sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, welcome. Congratulations to you and your family. I want to begin by paying a little compliment to Secretary Carter, President Obama. I think that they've been doing a very good job in terms of their selection of their top military generals, and whether it's General Milley or General Dunford or your nomination fits into a category of incredible experience, and but also what we've seen is frankness, where they've come to the committee and they've been very upfront with the committee. I think it's well respected, well appreciated. So if you're confirmed, I certainly hope you'll continue in that vein. And let me just mention, you know, General Milley was here a couple months ago, and he stated that given the current budget of the President's budget, that would put, given the force levels of the Army, would put the Army at, quote, high military risk, unquote. Pretty dramatic. Didn't get any news, but I thought it was pretty dramatic that the Chief Staff of the Army was saying that to do their mission. On the current budget, you have an incredible diverse mission set, which I think most people don't even recognize how broad it is, how important it is. Do you also see high military risk given the current budget and Air Force numbers that are, I think, at all-time lows right now in terms of what you need to do in terms of your mission? High military risk? That would be pretty remarkable. The two service chiefs, one incoming yourself, one current, state that. We need to do something about it, I have no doubt.
Sir, I would characterize as significant trending to high, which has been the previous assessment of verify.
So you don't think it's high right now? You're at the lowest levels. You have F-35 maintainers who are now being contractors. You don't think it's high risk?
So the challenge in readiness, really, when we have this discussion, I find, is that you've got to start this discussion with ready for what? Because If you were to ask me, what is the state of the readiness of the United States Air Force to fight violent extremism in the Middle East, I will tell you it's extremely high. Every airman I send downrange is ready to execute the fight. And if that was all we were asked to do for the next decade, I would tell you that we could sustain that. But if you tell me that I need to be simultaneously ready for the other global challenges that Secretary Carter has laid out, which I believe we need to be ready for, which is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, state-on-state actors, I believe that we're at high risk.
Thank you. Let me turn to follow up on the topic that Senator Donnelly was talking about, and that's the bed down of the KC-46. I know you're making decisions here. You're going to be making some OCONUS decisions relatively soon. When do you plan on making those decisions?
So on the KC-46, the next decision will be Mob 4, and we'll be doing that in the next several months.
And would that include OCONUS locations?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, we have 11 locations that will be bedding down. 2 of those that we are planning for OCONUS. The next 2 I do not believe are OCONUS. But
what do you look at in terms of characteristics for basing OCONUS KC-46s?
Sir, we have a set criteria and a basing process that first lays out that criteria. We share that criteria with the delegations, and then we score bases against that criteria that then produces a preferred candidate list. The preferred candidate list is where we actually then begin our site surveys. And
I'll throw out a couple characteristics that I think are important. Strategic location, hub of air combat power for the Asia Pacific, world-class training areas, 24/7 NORAD mission that routinely intercepts Russian bombers, 3 red flag exercises a year, over 100 fifth-generation fighters located there, C-17s, C-130s, F-16s. Do those sound like important characteristics?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what place I'm describing?
Yes, sir. And I think it was Billy Mitchell was right. It's strategic. Alaska is strategic.
So he called it the most strategic place in the world. Is that important in terms of KC-46 basing?
Sir, it's actually important across all the mission sets of the United States Air Force.
So can I get your commitment to take a very serious look at, when you're making the OCONUS decision, to take a look at Billy Mitchell's place that he called the most strategic place in the world as part of that?
Yes, sir, you have it.
Can I ask one other question? Are you concerned about recent unprofessional behavior by both the Chinese and Russian aircrafts during intercepts in international airspace, and what should we be doing about it? Some of us think that maybe we need to draw a line and then just tell them not to cross the line, kind of like what Turkey did. What's your recommendation on that, and how dangerous are those, and how more frequent are those?
So they are dangerous, and it's been more frequent. And here's my concern. When we do an intercept, which is one I've been personally involved in, you close on an aircraft that cannot defend itself with lethal weapons well inside of a lethal range, and very often in the back end of that aircraft are people that can't defend themselves. So one would ask, why would we allow each other to be able to close that range? And the reason is that for 50 years we've been doing this. 3 very professional air forces, U.S., China, and Russia, who have a fairly professional air force, and our pilots can do this with predictability and professionalism. And when that breaks down, 2 potential things can occur. One is a miscalculation by either side, and the second is that we find, as we did with the Chinese situation when that aircraft violated the number 1 rule of aviation, which is don't hit another aircraft with your aircraft, and when he actually hit the EP-3. The other concern I have is when you have an incompetent pilot that then takes that aggressive behavior and is not actually capable of being able to perform in that kind of an intercept. So that troubles me. And so if confirmed, my message to my counterparts in both China and Russia is, hey, we have professional air forces. Let's hold our airmen accountable.
But what should we be doing?
The Senator's time has expired. Go ahead.
Sir, what we should be doing is messaging them through mill-to-mill channels, through State Department channels, to ensure that they know that this is unacceptable behavior.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Some of us believe that Billy Mitchell wasn't always right, General.
His court-martial was an injustice.
Yeah.
I was going to mention that there was a court-martial involved, as I recall.
That could happen to anybody.
I was waiting for the senator to say north of the 54th parallel is also one of the criteria. But.
Well, closest to Korea, I think, but he was vindicated, I think, later, Billy Mitchell.
General, thank you very much for being here, and you and I discussed this a week or so ago. We recently had testimony that over 80% of the current members of the military of the United States come from military bloodlines. You yourself, I believe your father, brother, your daughter is a captain in the Air Force. That certainly is good in terms of esprit and commitment, but two problems suggest itself. One is a narrowing base of people to populate the military as we go from the Vietnam generation down to a much smaller base. And secondly, the development of a separate sort of military caste in our country. Talk to me about these two issues.
Yes, sir. If you look at where the active duty Air Force is actually located, we tend to be on the eastern seaboard, somewhat along the south, certainly a bit in the northern tier and on the western seaboard, but we're not everywhere. So as we've gotten smaller and smaller, it's harder to connect the American people with their active duty Air Force. I think
you see this as a concern?
It's an absolute concern. But where we actually are in every state is in our Air National Guard. And I think the closer connections that we have as one Air Force between all three components, it's our Air National Guardsmen that actually are most connected to the citizens, the people, the political leadership in each state, which is where I think we need to leverage. But I am concerned about exactly what you're talking about, which is the lack of a connection, which is further concerning the more and more we have second, third, and fourth generation.
Let me talk about math for a minute. We're talking about maintaining operations, significant tempo. We don't see conflicts resolving, disappearing, going away. We don't see the world getting more calm and easy to deal with. And yet we're talking about these significant upgrades. You're talking about the B-21, KC-46, deployment of the F-35 in the Navy, the Ohio-class replacement, ICBM. I mean, we're talking about major capital expenditures, and I don't know anybody that's talking about additional funds. One of the things that bothers me is we're now operating under budgetary decisions made in 2011, before Syria, before Ukraine, before South China Sea, before ISIS, and yet we're trying to pack 10 pounds of capacity into an 8-pound sack. I just see this as a looming, really a looming huge problem for this country. If we don't somehow account for increased threats and the necessity of the capital upgrades that we're facing.
Yes, sir, I agree.
Do you, I mean, is there any way you could maintain your capabilities and meet your responsibilities in a world of where the sequester return next year?
No, sir.
It just could not be done.
No, sir. If we're sequestered again, I mean, I can't give you a better example of what sequester did to the United States Air Force than the A-10 discussion, because in fact it was sequester that brought us the A-10 retirement. If we get sequestered again, because we had an $8 billion math problem to solve in a single year in 2015, if we're sequestered again, we'll have a $10 billion math problem to solve in 2018.
And will that have a direct, measurable effect on the national security of this nation?
Yes, sir. And others have testified, and I will add to that, we will be unable to execute the Defense Strategic Guidance if we are sequestered again.
I just hope people in this building and across the way are also listening to your testimony, because I think it's very important. You helped develop as Vice Chief the budgetary recommendations that turned into the authorizations that are in the bill that we just passed a few days ago. Are you comfortable with where the committee came out on as far as the Air Force's budgetary needs are concerned?
Sir, I'm generally comfortable. I know there's continued issues that we'll have to work, and if confirmed, I'll ensure that I can work them with you.
KC 46, a missed deadline, apparently, for delivery next year. It's unusual to have a deadline missed a year in advance. What is that going to do to the whole schedule for the deployment of the KC 46, and are you concerned about what's happening with that contract?
Sir, I'm absolutely disappointed that we missed this milestone. What will happen now with the program, and having been out there and walked the line and sat down and looked the company leadership in the eye in Seattle with Boeing, I'm confident that they have a good plan to be able to overcome the developmental challenges we're finding right now, primarily in the refueling boom, and those challenges, and they're working through those right now. But the unfortunate reality is that we're going to delay now up to a year receiving those airplanes. We still believe that we can absorb the impact of that 1-year delay in the first 2 bed downs, which will be an Altus for the training unit, and then McConnell, which will be the first ops unit. And then after that, we think we'll be back on track when we go to Pease and other bases after that.
I commend to you as you make your future decisions, the 101st out of Bangor, known as the Maniacs. That's a very skilled and a very important facility. I joined my colleague from Alaska, but now I'm talking about a base that's right around the 45th parallel. Thank you very much, General, for your testimony.
Sir, thank you.
General, just a few more follow-ups. The committee had a lot of concern, and there's provisions in the current bill of the NDAA that was just recently passed on the F-35 maintainer issue. Can you speak to that a little bit and what you see as the best path forward, how important it is to address that issue?
Yes, sir, and this is a challenge for all services who are trying to sustain and modernize at the same time, because none of us have maintainers that we're currently operating in a weapon system that we can then shift, because when you bring on a new weapon system, the first thing you do is train the maintenance force that's going to receive that aircraft. And so our challenge is, as the more we are told to keep the old aircraft, it's going to further delay bringing on the F-35. So those maintainers that we're counting on, we're working through a lot of different options. We've already done a number of things. We've transitioned to contract logistics at all of our non-deploying locations. As you know, sir, we did this in the aggressors up there in Alaska as well, and appreciate your support for that. So we're doing everything we can right now to be able to bring the F-35 on, but the more we are delayed in terms of bringing on new manpower and holding manpower in existing weapon systems, it can have a significant impact on the F-35.
What is the best solution to increase the end strength of the Air Force to make sure we have airmen working those issues as opposed to contractors?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
And has that been mentioned in the budget discussions in terms of your future end strength?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, in the 16 NDA, we're actually authorized to $321,000. And so we've put all the resources in place, both from recruiting and from a pipeline training, to be able to bring in the number of airmen. So if we're successful this year at getting to 317 and we see the kind of recruiting numbers we're looking for, we will likely come back to this committee and ask you to reprogram money to allow us to get to our authorization of 321. And so the bulk of those airmen that we're going to bring on are going to be maintainers.
Thank you. Just back to the C-46 issue, I mentioned a lot of the characteristics that I think are very powerful in terms of the strategic necessity of looking at Alaska. I would like to get your commitment during your first year, if you're confirmed, to come on up to Alaska and see those issues and strategic strengths for yourself.
Yes, sir, I will.
Great. Thank you again, General, and thank you to your family. Thank you for your years, decades really, of service to our country. This hearing is adjourned.
Yes, sir.